Welcome, I'm your host, Malcolm Gallagher. From our BizVision studios in the UK, you're watching the BVTV Conscious Matters channel. At BizVision, our commitment to the conscious agenda is total with our Conscious Academy, our programs, courses, and of course, our BVTV and podcast Conscious Matters show. Now, many summarize the conscious agenda as planet, people, and profits. But underneath those three words are many subjects which you need to touch upon. It's therefore a delight to deep dive into some of those subjects with an expert. And I've got a great one for you today. By the time we finish this short interview, I'll bet you she'll have your head buzzing with possibility. So let's say a big hello to Jamie Lerner. Welcome, Jamie.
Hello, thank you so much for inviting me.
It's a pleasure to meet you, Jamie. Jamie, I'm delighted you're kindly guesting on the BVTV Conscious Matters show because your work totally integrates with our aims for the channel for our viewers and listeners. In this BVTV talk show, I'll be chatting to Jamie in three parts. First part, I'll chat to her about what is well-being in the true sense, and how does a business leader go about it for him or herself and their team. In part two, we'll move to talking about what needs to be overcome to make well-being work. What are the typical challenges faced within a team, especially in these uncertain, confusing times? And in part three, we'll talk about the right way to maintain well-being across your business and what to watch to ensure that it doesn't dip. Jamie, before we get into our three-part chat, though, can you please briefly introduce yourself to my viewers and listeners? Who is Jamie? What's your story? What's your book about? Oh, and excuse me asking this, but what's a quickie?
Absolutely. So I was born with a knowing, and I think we all are. And then just through the day-to-day contrast of life, I think that we tend to move further away from our sense of who we truly are and our connection with ourselves. My fascination with people led me to study in psychology and social work. I got my master's. I started a private practice. I did psychotherapy for many years and realized that didn't feel like I was assisting people in moving forward because we spent so much time in the past. So I scrapped that. I studied and traveled, and now I do something different, which is the integrative approach to well-being, which assists people in assisting themselves to get from where they are now to where they want to be. And it's just a very fun and gentle process of helping people reconnect with who they are. And that's what I'm doing. Okay, so maybe a year and a half ago, out of requests from some clients, I started a new service called the Quickie, a lovely texting option, which really turned out to work out quite well. It was before a pandemic. However, it gave clients the option of utilizing me through texting. And what I found is it works quite well because people will text me a question or an issue or a problem. And as I'm texting them back, they have already answered their own question most often. So it really is a nice way to reinforce to people that they do know for themselves and they should trust themselves. And it also gives them an ongoing transcript for them to look back on. So it's a very nice option that's worked quite well for people, especially now. People don't have a lot of privacy. Everyone's home together. And so this is a way to help people help themselves.
Excellent. I've got to say to you, Jamie, before we move on, I love your calm approach to well-being. It's calming, which is what probably we're all needing at the moment. Your presentation, your style is lovely. I met somebody the other day who was into well-being, and he was giving me the big American rah-rah, you know what I mean? Like a sales thing, and I didn't feel calm at all after that. So, Jamie, let's kick off in part one by talking about well-being, especially in regard to a business leader and his or her team. Now, I know that the pandemic has caused and continues to cause stress, but surely well-being is more than a pandemic plaster, isn't it? How should a business approach well-being?
Well, I think well-being starts with the individual. And I think well-being is our birthright. And it's important that we remind people of that. Also, well-being comes from a place of taking personal responsibility and understanding that the most important thing is that we have self-care, that we begin to look inward and direct ourselves towards nurturing and nourishing ourselves, especially now. Then to go to a workplace that would support that would be ideal, where that could be facilitated through things like positivity, sense of community, um, feeling that there is safety in the workplace, where there is not emotional bullying or sexual harassment. So, the things that really people have been talking about for a very long time. And I think this pandemic has created an amazing opportunities for companies and businesses to really reinvent themselves in such a way where they are focused on people, their employees, their customers whose needs have clearly changed. And I think that it's not going to be an option. It's going to be a necessity for any business to be successful.
Mm,
So there's wonderful opportunity here.
yeah, I'm totally with you there. It's hard though, isn't it, for a leader to suddenly understand that I've got to maybe make this change. Particularly if we look back at the traditional leadership of, almost like Moses sending down the tablet to do this, do that, do the other, to suddenly be considerate. How should they go about making that change, do you think?
I don't think they have a choice anymore. I think this pandemic has really made it clear that people will need a lot more space if they're going to go back to work. We will not be, pushed together in large groups. People's needs are going to be reconsidered in terms of just, especially psychologically. People are very fragile right now, and they do want to go back to work. People want to be back in the workplace in some capacity. However, I think business leaders are going to have to be creative and flexible and assist people in feeling safe to come back to the workplace by providing things like whatever it's going to be, masks or social distancing or more time off. Or I think, if anything, this pandemic has taught us to be flexible. We
Mm,
need to be more flexible and gentle with people.
yeah,
So I think has to happen. There's just no other way to get people to feel comfortable. And if employees don't feel comfortable working, they're really not going to be much use as an employee. Their interactions with the people that they are serving are not going to be positive if they don't feel good and comfortable wherever they are.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Now, just keep talking about well-being now. uh, all too often, I think people think that it's you got to look like Muscle Man or Barbie doll or something like that, and but it's not, is it? Anybody can achieve both physical and mental well-being, can't they?
Yes, but I do think that it's important for people to understand that well being comes from managing your thoughts, which sounds in some ways daunting, and yet it's not. Because what we think about is a reflection of how we feel. And times like this, it's so easy to feel anxious. There's so much information and misinformation. And I think it's complicated. However, we have a responsibility to ourselves and to our children and to all the people that we are serving, whatever it is that we are doing, to find that place of calm within ourselves, to find that gentleness within ourselves, find that nurturing within ourselves. And sometimes it is as simple as like mindfully sitting and eating a meal or mindfully doing something throughout your day that makes you feel good. We have to find a way to feel good. or we're not good for ourselves or anybody else.
Mm.
And then the workplace can really facilitate that for us. But to go into work empty and expect that somebody's going to do it for you, it's not going to happen. It's an inside job. And
It,
it's a worthwhile job because when we feel good about ourselves, we feel good about everybody.
yeah, yeah. And do you think, and this is a personal question, by the way, because we're doing it, do you think it's important to have a partner in this well-being approach? I'm fortunate that my wife and I think alike on this sort of thing, and we sit down and plan the menu for the week ahead, and all the sort of time together bits as well. Oh, well, not to forget the glass of wine on a Friday.
I think this has been a really interesting time for people because they have been forced to be together, probably a lot more than they wanted to be. And I think it could go either way. People could cooperate and work together, or it could be a very stressful and unhappy, uncomfortable situation. But I think it's the individual's job to create it for oneself and then model it for others or not. But it's our personal responsibility to do that for ourselves. And that certainly trickles down to all the other people that we're with. If we're feeling good, when we're with others, they feel good. And that's a lovely gift. But we must serve ourselves first. We must put our own oxygen mask on first before assisting others.
Yes, it's a good point, that, isn't it? And they do tell you that on airlines as well.
Yes, they do. Yes,
Yeah,
they do.
yeah, it's sensible. Right, Jamie, let's move to part two. And before we do that, I'd like to remind viewers and listeners of your website URL, your website address, which is www, all the three W's, dot Jamie, spelled Jamie, Jamie, hyphen Lerner, LERNER.com, jamie-lerner.com. That's for listeners. Obviously, viewers, you can see it on the screen behind me. Jamie, it's time for part two. You would think in that reading some articles that someone just waves a well-being wand over a business and it's fixed. I'm sure it's not like that. As a leader approaches the conscious agenda subject of well-being, what challenges do you think he or she needs to be aware of, and how should they be overcome?
I think company culture is really important. And I think that how a company defines itself and how a company markets itself is really important. But how the company treats its employees, I think, is absolutely key. I mean, your company is only as good as how you treat your employees and how they feel when they're coming and going. And it's so interesting. Now, the essential worker has finally got the recognition that it should have gotten years and years ago. I mean, think about all these frontline workers that are going and working at the grocery stores or at the care centers or the nurses or the doctors. I mean, it's now that we are really beginning to understand that without those people, we would not have had any of the basic things that we've needed as we're all been required to quarantine. So appreciation, I think, is the most important thing that we can do as a company to support our employees, along with allowing them to think out of the box, allowing them to have some autonomy, being mindful that we don't delegate and then micromanage, which clearly is such a difficult situation for someone to be in, to be handed responsibility and then have someone standing over them, assisting them to do it completely different than the way they would do. So these are in some ways very basic, and yet you don't see it very often in companies.
It's worrying, isn't it? Well, let's just assume that there's a business leader, of which there are many, watching and listening to this and says, that's what Jamie's saying is exactly what I need. How would you approach, if that company said, come and talk to us, how would you approach to go and help them have a team that was full of well-being and was correctly motivated and conscious?
And I think that's the operative word, have a team. that people all feel like that they're part of something, that they're part of the company, that they're not just showing up and doing their job, but that they're an important part of what is happening and what the bottom line is going to be. So, the other thing is to talk to employees and ask them what they're needing and what they're wanting and what they're thinking, because I think that's really important. Um, and I think it's easy to do now because we're beginning to ask very different questions of people than we have had in the past. So there is a natural kind of invitation for this for business leaders to include their employees, um, and to, I think, listen is the most important thing. Listen to your employees, listen to your customers. That's the other thing I have found. There are so many businesses whose customers are asking for one thing, but the businesses don't listen. They are telling the customers what they're needing. Well, guess what? We're pretty clear about what we're needing and what we're wanting now. So I think we've gained great clarity as a result of this pandemic. And I think that would be a great way to assist employees and customers to
I
listen.
really like that. And I remember many years ago, somebody said to me, "You've got two ears and one mouth, Malcolm, use them in that order." So yes, listening is important, isn't it? But people don't, do they? Thanks, JB. Now, for part 3, I want to talk about making it all work, but most important, of keeping well-being going. I worry that sometimes people have trends, or fads, as we would call them. Well, we'll do this week, and next week we'll do that, and so on. But well-being has to become, as you said before, part of the business culture, hasn't it? So, in the busyness of business, though, it's easy to lose focus, which in turn could mean that all that was gained was lost. How do you suggest a business goes about maintaining a well-being focus? And how should success of that be measured that will show the benefits of well-being?
I think things like, and I have seen it in businesses recently, things like retreats, things like company get-togethers, a way for the organizations to become more of a community. I think that that is really helpful to offer things like people having the opportunity to get out of their office through the day and take a walk, or to have healthy food available to them, or things that on an ongoing basis would really support the well-being of employees. On-site childcare, or a way for parents to check in with childcare if it's not on site throughout the day, so they're not having to be distracted and worried. Um, kind of things like good insurance. How about that? I know it's not in the United States. We really need that for people to feel like if they have an issue, they can go and use their insurance. Some of these are pretty basic, but time off, sick time,
Yes.
all of these things, and really encouraging people when they're not feeling well, stay home. I mean, if we didn't get that message loud and clear throughout this pandemic, I don't know what message we got, but it's really important and it's new. In the past, they would want you to come in no matter how you felt. And I think that that really is not supporting anyone's sense of well-being.
Yes.
So
Go on.
some of them are just very basic things. And I think a little goes a very long way with people.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that one. Because, often these little things, and they are little things at times, just basically asking somebody how they are and genuinely asking them and listen attentively, they don't cost money, those sort of things. They just cost a little bit of time to ask, don't they? I think another good, interesting way that perhaps well-being will be measured, and I appreciate your thoughts on this, is that here in the UK, it's said that 1 in 4 workers at the moment are actively considering moving jobs because of the poor support they've had from their employer during the lockdown. Perhaps a way of success could be less sort of moving, retention rate. What do you think?
I have to say, I think that's really wonderful that people have actually considered themselves and what they need and have decided that they want something different. So that's very empowering to hear that people have consciously chosen, this is not working for me, and these conditions are not acceptable. So, yes, I think if you are a company and you want to retain employees, instead of feeling like, oh, everyone's replaceable, I think that would be very important to
Mm.
begin to think about.
Yeah, and that's a sensible way that maybe the C-suite or the board of directors should be looking at investing in working with people like yourselves, because it's the cost of that compared to try and find new talent and everything is is quite a nice imbalance, isn't it? Jamie, I just want to remind people before we go to finish and say thank you to you, just to remind them of your website, because I think there's a lot in there, and I've wandered around, and the calmness that I was talking about beforehand, I think that comes across from your website, and that's essentially what we all need to be looking at these frustrating, worrying, concerning times, finding that oasis of calm. So just remind you, people, viewers, obviously you can see it on the screen behind me, but for listeners, again, it's still the W's dot Jamie, Jami, Jamie hyphen Lerner, Lerner, and that's .com, jamielerner.com. Jamie, the exciting thing that's happening in our altered world now is that vast numbers of businesses are awakening to their need to be people conscious, people caring, to understand the needs of their people, and that well-being is vital. Jamie, you've really beautifully shown that for us. Thanks for a great interview.
Thank you so much for inviting me.